So let's start by recapping where things stand for the Miami Heat from a salary cap standpoint. Prior to the Hayward Highsmith trade, the Heat were $1.6 million over the luxury tax. They were able to trade Highsmith and shed his $5.6 million for this season, meaning that the Heat were able to become $4 million under the luxury tax. And then, of course, they signed Drew Smith to a 3-year partially guaranteed deal. But for this upcoming season, he does have about $2.4 million guaranteed, meaning that the Heat currently, as is, are $1.6 million under the luxury tax. They have 14 of their 15 roster spots filled. So a lot of people are thinking, okay, good. We still have one roster spot available to finally get a backup center. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because right now, the minimum contract for 1 year of service in the NBA is a little over $2 million. So unless the Heat sign someone with no NBA experience, they cannot actually sign a player to a minimum contract without going over the luxury tax, which is just something that they're not going to do. It's at least something that they can't do right now. But what they can do is wait until early December, where a player's prorated minimum contract is less than that $1.6 million, if that makes sense. So right now, the Heat cannot sign a minimum player without going over the luxury tax, but in early December, that is something that they will be able to do. The problem is the Heat have a glaring hole. Hey, yo, pause on that. But anyways, they have a hole on the roster. They desperately need another center, somebody that could back up Khalil Ware, or they just need some size in general. I mean, at 6'7", I would be like the 4th tallest player on the Miami Heat, which is just not acceptable. It's very obvious that they need some more size on the roster, just like the Miami Dolphins, who have like no quality cornerbacks going into the season. I just think it's malpractice in terms of team building. Like, people are getting paid millions of dollars to put together a roster, and they just have these glaring holes on it. I don't understand it. Like, I like Drew Smith. I like Matthew Judon, who the Dolphins just signed, but the Heat need a center, not another point guard. And the Dolphins need a cornerback, not Matthew Judon. Maybe if the Dolphins did have someone to play in the secondary, they wouldn't have such long odds to win the division on FanDuel. I did see right now the Dolphins are actually plus 210 to finish second in the division and plus 135 or plus 175 to finish third. I might throw a little bit of money on both of those, because I don't think there's any way the Dolphins finish first or fourth. So you can actually guarantee some profit by betting a little bit of dough on second and third. I do like that idea on FanDuel. But anyways, one idea that I heard today that would actually allow the Heat to create more cap space in order to sign another minimum player would be to simply waive Terry Rozier. I listened to Wes Goldberg today on the Locked On Heat podcast and also read Anthony Chang's article. And they both pointed out something that I didn't realize before, which is Terry Rozier's salary for this upcoming season is not fully guaranteed. Of the $26.6 million he's owed, my God, imagine making $26.6 million to do nothing. That's actually wild. Nothing but bet on yourself, I guess, right? Literally and figuratively. But of the $26.6 million that Terry Rozier is owed, only, and it sounds weird to say only, but only $24.9 million is guaranteed. Meaning, if the Heat were to waive Terry Rozier right now, it would open up an additional $1.7 million. So if you add that $1.7 million to the current $1.7-ish million under the luxury tax that the Heat are, they would be able to have about $3.4 million total under the luxury tax. One note that I want to point out in regards to Terry Rozier's contract is, according to Spotrac, this season is only fully guaranteed if the team he's on makes the second round of the playoffs and Rozier plays at least 70 games in any of the 22-23, 23-24, or 24-25 seasons. The reason that note is interesting to me is because those 3 seasons already happened. They are in the past. And Terry Rozier did not play 70 games in any of those seasons. So if the terms of his fully guaranteed final year is that the team has to make the second round of the playoffs and he has to play 70 games, well, if he didn't play 70 games, then doesn't that mean that his fully guarantee on that final year should be void? And wouldn't that mean that the Heat actually have that $1.7 million extra in salary cap space right now? I was a little confused about the wording of his contract, so I actually asked it on Twitter, put the same stuff out there, tagged Bobby Marks, Yossi Goslin, a couple of cap experts, and I also tagged Wes Goldberg, who did respond to me, and he basically explained that that note could be considered an unlikely bonus, which still counts as a part of the 2023 CBA. But I didn't really understand Wes's response because I understand what an unlikely bonus is. For example, I think Tyler Hero had a bonus for like winning DPOY or something like that. But in this case with Terry Rozier, it's not an unlikely bonus. It's a bonus that is now literally impossible because he did not meet the 70-game threshold in any of the 3 prior seasons, meaning that it is now possible for him to fulfill those terms of that bonus. So I'm now wondering if he's not actually going to get $26.6 million this year, and maybe that extra money could open up right now. I'm a little confused, but I'm going to rely on the cap experts to get back to me. So if I do hear from one of those guys, I'll be sure to update you. So on the podcast, though, with Wes and David, they did go back and forth on whether they would want to waive Terry Rozier right now. Because, regardless of the stuff we just talked about, if you do waive Terry Rozier, you definitely would have that $1.7 million open up right now. So they deferred a little bit on what they would do. My initial reaction was, yes, I absolutely would waive Terry Rozier, because I understand if you do waive him, that means that you would have $24.9 million of dead money this season. But if you don't waive him, you would have $26.6 million of dead money this season because Terry Rozier is not going to play. So whether he's on the roster or not, I kind of look at it as dead money. I don't really see the point of him just riding the bench, collecting a check, especially when you consider how many damn guards we have now. Of course, you got Davion Mitchell going into training camp, someone that you did not have at the start of last season. You traded 2 front court players in Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love to get Norman Powell, another guard. You just offloaded Haywood Highsmith to sign another guard in Drew Smith. You drafted Kasparas Yakachonis. So the way I see it, as things stand right now, there's like 6 guards ahead of Terry Rozier. That's Tyler Hero, Norman Powell, Davion Mitchell, Pelle Larsson, Drew Smith, and Kasparas Yakachonis. Even if you want to say that Kasparas is not ahead of Terry, fine. But I don't think Kasparas is going to play this year anyways. So whether he's ahead of Terry or behind Terry, I don't think either guy is going to play. So I really don't see the point of just keeping Terry Rozier around for nothing. You might as well waive him to be able to sign a guy like Kai Jones or Trey Lyles at a position of need. But that's how I thought initially. And then Wes Goldberg brought up the very interesting point, which is waiving Terry Rozier would mean you no longer have his large expiring contract to trade at the trade deadline. I know it may seem right now that Terry Rozier has no trade value, but he is a large $26 million expiring contract, and you would be surprised how valuable that becomes at the trade deadline. Imagine we're approaching February and all of a sudden a star asks for a trade. And then the Miami Heat would have a very large expiring contract to help facilitate a trade for that potential star. You really would have 2 large expiring contracts because you can include Norman Powell as well. So in that case, the Heat would be able to match the salary of a star with expiring deals. That's a huge benefit to the other team. And most other teams in the league, they would have to send back some kind of long-term money in order to match the contractual value of whichever star asks out. And that would likely include contracts that the other team might not want. If, for example, if Giannis asks for a trade at the trade deadline, maybe the Bucks are hanging around the 6th or 7th seed and he doesn't want to waste the rest of the season. Well, it's going to be very hard to match the $50+ million that Giannis is making with expiring money. Not a lot of teams can do that like the Heat. And of course, from the Bucks perspective, they would want expiring contracts because they would like to start fresh next year so they could have a bunch of money off the books in addition to whatever other assets that he could offer in terms of picks, young players. And obviously, it would take everything, but you get the point. I do think it's beneficial to have those large expiring contracts on the roster. I understand I'm speaking in hypotheticals and using a lot of ifs, like saying if a star asks out or if Giannis demands a trade. But truthfully, I'd rather have these generous, large expiring contracts to help facilitate a trade in the chance a star asks out than not have those contracts because we waived Terry Rozier, but we would have a Trey Lyles or Kai Jones on the roster. Because right now, the Heat are going to be mid-next season with or without another center. So I would prefer that Miami keeps their best possible chance to get a star mid-season, and they would have that by keeping Terry Rozier's large expiring contract. Unless, of course, the Heat could somehow rebuild Rozier's trade value and trade him for assets, maybe a second-round pick or two. That was David Ramil's point on the podcast. He was saying, listen, it's not likely that you would ever get anything from Rozier, but he would rather keep him in the chance that Rozier has some kind of magical bounce back season. The problem with that point, though, which it does make sense, but the problem is I don't think Rozier will even get the playing time for the reasons we mentioned earlier, just because of where he stands on the depth chart. I don't even think he'll get the playing time to get a chance to rebuild his trade value. So I just don't see that being possible. I know last year Rozier played there was a stretch where he played every minute of the fourth quarter when he shouldn't have been. He still played 64 games when he shouldn't have. So you could easily say Spo's going to do the same thing this year. But there's just so many more guards on the roster that Spo loves, like Davion and Drew, that I can't see Terry taking any of their minutes. I just can't see it. Worst case scenario, though, the Heat actually attach picks to get rid of Terry Rozier, just like they did with Haywood Highsmith and Dwayne Dedmon and Victor Oladipo and everybody else. I hate when the Heat do that. So I'm hoping they don't get the same idea and try to do the same thing with Terry Rozier. Although maybe an even worse case scenario would be if the Heat waived and stretched Terry, because that would mean that they put $8.3 million of dead money on the books for the next 3 seasons. The reason Miami might consider that is because it would open up $18 million more this year, but it would put $8 million more on the books for the next 2 after next year, which that would make no sense to me. What are you going to do with an extra $18 million right now? There's nobody out there. Your team is not that great. Your team is not an $18 million player away from winning a championship. So you might as well just keep that money on the books this year, let it all expire, and then you have it all opened up for the next few seasons after next. In hindsight, I was first wishing that the Heat just stretched Highsmith instead of trading a pick to get rid of him, because that would have only put $1.8 million on the books over the next 3 seasons, which is a lot less dead money than if the Heat stretched Rozier. And it also would have put Miami under the luxury tax. The problem is it would have only put them under by about $200,000, and the Heat would have still had only 13 players on the roster, but the rules state that you need to have at least 14. And as we discussed earlier, if you're only $200,000 under the luxury tax, there's no way the Heat could have added a 14th player without staying under the luxury tax. So simply just stretching Highsmith would not have worked. The same can actually be said about Fontecchio. Simply stretching him prior to the Highsmith trade, that would have got the Heat under the luxury tax, but not enough that would have also allowed them to sign a 14th player and stay under. Of course, the Heat can still stretch Fontecchio now if they want to create the additional cap space to get a center. Doing so would put $2.7 million of dead money on the books for the next 3 seasons, but that would free up an additional $5.6 million for Miami right now. And having that $2.7 million of dead money for the next 3 years is not the end of the world, but I don't think that dead money is worth adding Trey Lyles or Kai Jones right now. I don't think it's worth it. Either way, the deadline to waive and stretch a player is August 29th, so we'll see if the Heat decide they want to do any of these options and actually add another center to the roster. If not, I do think they wait till early December, see who's available, and then sign a guy to the prorated minimum so they can have 15 on the roster and still be under the luxury tax. But that's all I got to say for this video, so let me know your thoughts down below. Do you want the Heat to waive Terry Rozier, or do you think they should just hang on to his contract and let it expire at the end of the season? Very curious to hear what y'all think, so make sure to put your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, like the video and subscribe because your support is greatly appreciated. I want to shout out FanDuel one more time for sponsoring this video, and I want to remind y'all to fill out my Family Feud questionnaire down in the description below, because I'm going to use y'all answers in an upcoming Family Feud battle amongst some of your favorite Heat content creators. So make sure to fill that out for me too. And I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace out, everyone.
Look, pull up in your city trying to get that dead face. Do it on my own, I don't need no dead weight. Had to kill him off, yeah, I need a head space. You know this homegrown bitch don't offend me.